When an elderly woman tells a young black man that she should return to Africa, a normal dining trip turns into an unforgettable showdown. What he says next is not just silence about the universe, it changes everything. The grocery store lived on a total of daily errands. Buyers pushed carts into the hallways, some of them lost their thoughts, others spoke quietly. It was a sunny afternoon in a small Ohio neighborhood. It seemed everyone knew. But today, normal flow breaks in unexpected ways. An older woman was probably in the late 1970s approaching the product section. She was impatient and let out a breath as she reached for the apple bag. Her faded cardigan and her carefully defined silver hair recorded her modest appearance. But nothing after that. A tall, casual young black man dressed in a blue hoodie and jeans approached the same stand and reached for a nearby bag. His name was Daryl. He was calm and polite, and seemed to enjoy mixing it up in the river in the shop. He wrote SMS on his phone and balanced the basket and food when it happened. The older woman turned sharply, realizing Daryl's presence. Her expression changed. That wasn't subtle. Her eyes narrowed, her lips insisted. "Her human beings don't belong here," she said loudly. Daryl freezes, his fingers floating over his phone. When he started, she continued. Her sound was so painful that it cut off. "Why not return to Africa where you're coming? The air seems to be thicker." Several buyers nearby held their mark. Some people replaced the uncomfortable look, while others didn't listen. The shop stopped rhythm and was replaced by an unpleasant silence that had been stretched so long. Daryl's initial response was shocking. His forehead frowned, and for a moment he seemed to be able to say something immediately. But he didn't. Instead, he breathed slowly. His face couldn't be readable, as if oppressing any possible reactions. The woman still clutching the apple and the clenched one was touched and firm. The tension was noticeable, and everyone could feel the wide range of hearing. The young mother quickly piloted the child, but the older man looked nervously Daryl near the potato, waiting to see what he would do. The next silence was heavier than all words, providing a stage for what comes next. Daryl was completely quiet for a moment. His hands grabbed the grip of his food. The world around him looked steaming in the shop, each face facing in that direction. The weight of the woman's words hangs in the air like a foul smell that no one can escape. Older women are not reflected again. Her attitude was rebellious, as if she hadn't expected reasoning. She set the cardigan with a huff, and her chin raised in a reactive way. A young employee stacking bananas a few meters away, like he's gone mad in the middle of the move, not knowing whether he should enter or leave. The cashier leaned his head to get a better view. The growing crowd didn't approach, but they didn't. "Are you a witness now?" Daryl looked at the woman, his face calmed down, but his eyes were full of thought. 1,000 answers ran through his head. He could override, scream, and hold a storm, but none of these options felt right. The tension pressed him against him like weight, but instead of breaking, he took a little time to breathe. He switched his basket into his other hand, silenced his posture, and extended his attitude. His voice was calm when it came, but intentionally slashed through the unpleasant atmosphere. "I started," his healthy measurements. His question was not a charge. It was reflexive, as if he was giving her the opportunity to think about her words. However, she seemed uninterested in remorse. "I said what I said." She grabbed her voice. "This is my country. People like them don't belong here. That's all." A young woman near the pan duct jumped into the air, growing gentle muttering from the crowd, but Daryl remained stable. He didn't speak up. He didn't take a step closer. Instead, he stretched out a break and gave her the opportunity to crush the ears of everyone around her. "In turn," he said, and nodded slowly. His calmness disarmed. almost worried about his strength. "Since you spoke to it, we've been talking about it." The room held his breath and waited for his answer. The storm came. But that wasn't the way someone had expected. Darrell shifted his weight and deliberately placed the basket on the floor. His calm felt like gravity, and even the specific listeners brought everyone closer. He saw the older woman with no anger, but with a gentle determination that turned her into discomfort. They said, "I don't belong here." He started, his voice is stable, but firm. "But please tell me where I came from." His words put weight on his weight, and everyone spoke as if carefully chosen. "My great-grandfather was born in Mississippi," he said. "He was a co-owner he had and broke his back so that his children could live a better life. His father? He was lured, beaten, and sold as property. And for what? To build the country they stand in." The woman's lips got stuck, but she said nothing. But the crowd remained. A man near the milk, who was used to the phone, put it all down. The older couple whispered together but didn't look away. "My grandfather, Darrell," continued, and his voice achieved strength. "I fought in World War II. I fought for the country that sent him abroad. Do you know the reason? Because he believed in the promises of this country." A quiet space fell across the room. Even the fridge fuss seemed quiet now. "And my parents," he continued, and although he dared his tone, she lost nothing of his intensity. "Not weapons or fists, but they walk through every day and wear me in a way that believes in friendliness, respect, and hard work. My mother is a teacher. She spent her life helping her children. My father? He's the man mechanic who stops on the side of the road to help someone like you collapse when your car collapses." He calmed the words down before continuing, his eyes still locked in her. "So, are you saying I don't belong here? Should I go back to Africa?" He shook his head slightly. His voice is now touching sadness. "I am just part of this country as you do. My family is the price of blood, sweat, and tears. Maybe it's because I paid." Her hands trembled slightly, as the older woman's face was washed away and she clenched the apple. She opened her mouth as if hoping for an answer, but it stopped. But her words grabbed her by the neck. Darrell took a step back. He said, but now he spoke to the whole crowd. "But what is useful to be ignorant in silence? It's better that we all are better than this." The weight of his words remained, but the story was not over yet. The crowd's response will speak more eloquently than anything else. Darrell's silence in words was almost jarring. No one has moved a bit. The older woman's face was a patchwork of emotions, anger, embarrassment, and deeper things that seemed almost like shame. She threw the crowd as if looking for an alliance, but no one came. A middle-aged man wearing a baseball cap appears. "He was right," the man said, his voice calmed down. "We need to be better." His words seemed to have broken the spell. An elderly woman nodded near the freezer. "My father fought in the same war," she said quietly, her voice shaking. "He always said the important color was the red of the flag. My tweets are beginning to grow." A young cashier under the age of 20 was called from her station. "I've never seen anyone deal with that grace." "Thank you." The older woman was now visibly nervous, clutching her cart. She did not apologize, but the fire in her eyes became dark. When she finally came, her voice was quiet and almost floating. "I didn't mean," she started, but I stopped. Darrell turned to her, his expression softening now. "That's not what you mean," he said gently. "It's about how it gets stuck. Words are important. Action is even more important." The man at the deli counter applauded, slowly breaking the tension. I heed at first, but the others closed and the sound swelled indefinitely. People not only applauded for Darrell's words, but also for the courage needed to stand up to hatred with dignity. The older woman looked around one last time, Her face turned pale before she quietly rolled the car towards the exit. When she left, several people moved in to comfort Daryl. The woman put her hand on her shoulder and said, "Thank you for saying something that I had to say." Daryl smiled weakly and put the basket back in his hand. Sometimes, he almost told himself, not winning or losing. It's about ensuring that people hear the truth. The crowd slowly spread, and the tension in the air was replaced by a sense of reflex. Some seemed inspired, others thoughtful, but everyone seemed to have changed in small ways. The moment had passed, but the influence of Daryl's words had not ended. What happened next will leave a lasting impression. The atmosphere at the grocery store felt different and more thoughtful as the crowd returned to her routine. Daryl finished his purchase and measured his steps as if to handle everything that had happened. The weight of the moment didn't shake him, but it made him reflective. At the register, the young cashier, who had been spoken before, scanned his thing with a shy smile. "What you said back there," she hesitated, then continued. "It made a lot of sense, especially with such mercy. People are not always like that." Daryl smiled and he spoke warmly. "Sometimes it's the only way grace can break through. Anger only builds walls." Outside, the sun began to set, and I was watching a long shadow across the parking lot. When Daryl went to his car, he noticed an older woman sitting on her and grabbed the steering wheel. For a while, he thought about going to her, but disagreed with it. Some lessons take time to settle down, and he had already said things that he had to say. In the evening, Daryl sat at the kitchen table with his father and told the events of the day. His father listened carefully as a man holding several words listened, his hands flowing over the table. "You did the right thing, son," his father finally said. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who has seen it. People like you couldn't change overnight, but they planted seeds. Sometimes you can do anything. Plant seeds and grow them." Daryl nodded, his father's words shaking deeply in his dizziness. He realized that the encounter was unpleasant, but this was necessary. Ignorance will not change unless we are faced, and silence will only leave it. The older woman sat in the dining room above the city and stared at a pristine plate holding food in front of her. Daryl's words made all the cuts by making herself in her head and armoring her assumptions. She thought of her grandchildren, and for the first time she felt a desire for doubt that was somewhat unknown. The next day, the story of what happened at the grocery store spread across the neighborhood. People talked about Daryl's answers, his courage, and the dignity he dealt with the situation. It was more than just an incident. It became a lesson, a memory of the power of words, and a meaning of what is right and right. Daryl didn't ask for attention for what he did, but he looked for his actions by the community in ways he didn't expect. The stranger approached him with gratitude and shared their own stories of prejudice and resilience. His quiet stand sparked a conversation that had been avoided for a long time. Older women are beginning to change too. It wasn't immediate, but she began to question the beliefs she had had for a long time. She didn't know if she had seen Daryl again, but she hoped she had the courage to apologize if she did. These moments remind us of the power of kindness, strength, and truth that we face ignorance. They say standing doesn't mean you can always scream, and that doesn't mean you speak calmly and confidently. Remember yourself for everyone. Your words and actions are important. You can get hurt or you can heal, can be covalent or combined. If you've made this story move, don't forget to subscribe and share it. Together we can spread the message of hope, courage, and understanding and create a better world.